creating psychological safety is the number one kind of priority of leaders in today's world. So what does it mean to create psychological safety? How do you, it's not being nice, it's not sugarcoating. Conflict is an opportunity for connection when you go about it with curiosity.
This is Brand Story, a podcast featuring in-depth conversations with leaders, marketers, and brand storytellers about their professional journey and the impact they are making on the world around them. Welcome to the Brand Story podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gilman, and my guest today is Dalia Feldheim. Dalia is currently the founder of Flow Leadership Consultancy, a business focused on brand building, diversity, inclusion, and happiness in the workplace. And Dalia worked at Procter and Gamble for over 17 years, and there she led so many memorable advertising campaigns, including the iconic Always Like a Girl in 2014, which won 14 awards at Cannes and was listed on the Forbes 2020 10 Most Influential Campaigns of the Century. Hi, Dalia. Welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to talk to you about your journey and how you got where you are today and your wonderful new book. I have a copy right here. I'm very excited to read it. I've started, but I haven't gotten that far yet, but I'm really enjoying it so far. When you came up with the Like a Girl campaign, what was the goal of the campaign for you? Because that was a very groundbreaking campaign.
Yeah, and I don't like to take credit for it because it's really the agency that came up with, you know how it goes. We gave a brief. We were very clear that, that was kind of a revelation when I was doing work in India among underprivileged girls that we can talk about later. It was very clear for me that personally, I'm not in the business of selling pads. I'm in the business of women empowerment because I see what, confidence can do for a young girl. And that led us to this global brief. And I remember when the agency first presented that, we were all in tears because, I felt 17 years, that is exactly what I was working for. So, our goal was the commercial. And for those who don't remember it, basically we asked a young girl what it means to run like a girl. And she says, what do you mean? It means run as fast as you can, right? But somehow things change during puberty and suddenly it becomes an insult. And, our goal with that commercial was to change the meaning of words and reclaim that phrase to mean simply be proud to be who you are. And I am just over the moon, as one of the marketing directors involved in that was the business results and Forbes recognized it as the 10 most influential campaigns. But I can tell you as a mom of 3, and I say that also when my youngest daughter came back from school, called me from school, she was 12 at the time, all excited. It's like, Mom, they're showing your ad in social studies. And I think, every time I talk about it, women say, oh, I remember that. Every time I talk about women empowerment, I bring the ad, so yeah, more than a commercial, it really became an icon for women empowerment. And that's kind of why I decided to call my book Dare to Lead Like a Girl as a homage for that campaign.
Yeah, and I think, having your daughter come home and tell you that it's being taught in social studies, that might be the best award of all or the best accolade.
Completely.
That's so meaningful. I've heard you speak, and I was at your virtual book launch, and I really enjoyed it. And your journey to get to the Dare to Lead Like a Girl book is very personal. It also has a lot to do with some of the qualities that I think haven't been classically valued in leaders: passion and empathy. And so, can you talk a little bit about your journey, about how you got from the red thread of this idea to where you are today?
Well, I think my story, I remember actually when I told it for the first time in this conference, Tal Ben-Shahar, who kind of he's Harvard's guru for positive psychology, and he was in the audience. And he came to me after and he's like, Dalia, you need to speak on TED and you need to write a book. And I remember literally, I was kind of, me? My stories are any girl next door. And he said, well, that's why they're so relevant. But so for me, I started off kind of working with Procter and Gamble, as you mentioned, for 17 years. And then I moved to another company. And the story kind of that I guess led me to or drove me to write the book is the story of the contrast, right? And, one that kind of stuck in my head is very early on in my career, maybe 4 months into the role, I was doing a big launch of panty liners, actually. And, my product got stuck in customs, and I was in the general manager's office trying to kind of understand what went on. And, I remember I was just so angry and so frustrated, when you work really hard for something and, something external happens. And when I get frustrated, I tear up, and I'm sitting there and I'm tearing up, and I'm in my general manager's office. How embarrassing. And, I'm frantically trying to regain my composure. And, he smiled at me and he offered me a box of tissue. And when I finally regained my composure, he said something that really stuck in my head. He said, Dalia, don't you ever be embarrassed for crying in the office again. That's a sign of your passion. And passion is your superpower.
That's wonderful.
And that's amazing, right? And I can tell you, 17 years in P&G, it's not that every manager was like Jim, but most of my managers really, believed in me. It was a culture of people first, take care of your people and the business takes care of itself. And my career just thrived. I was able to really bring my purpose today every single day, whether it's, as a director in building people. I became a training junkie because and P&G really recognized me spending 50% of my time in building the organization. But it's not until my career reached the lowest point that I really realized what he was talking about. And that was 17 years later. So I ended up moving with P&G from Geneva to Moscow to then Singapore. And in 2015, P&G did a big, organization change, and they wanted me back in Geneva. And by that time, my husband opened his startup. It was doing really well. I really felt I need to put my money where my mouth is on dual career. So I left P&G and I took a role as chief marketing officer for another Fortune 500 company. I don't mention the name because it's irrelevant, but the company was great. The global CEO was great. The global CMO, I really loved the vision, and they brought me in to change things. And 1 month into the role, I got a new manager, the local CEO. And Steve, it took me a week to realize that we were coming from different worlds completely. I mean, it was almost like he was sent to me to kind of show me a shadow of everything I believed in leadership. I mean, I was all about the people and the passion and creativity, and he was all about the numbers and the scorecard and ROI, return on investment, right? And most days it was like ROI or you die. That was kind of the culture. But the specific event that I think really became a pivotal event is one day he summoned me into his office, like you summon, someone to the headmaster, and he started giving me feedback. Now, Steve, I love feedback. We grew up on this concept of tough love, that, feedback that is direct and honest and not sugarcoating, but really comes from a position of care. There was no love that day. It was just really humiliating, denigrating. I mean, it's almost like a blow after a blow, and I'm kind of holding it in because now I'm a C-suite woman, one of the only women on his team, and he's kind of, I'm holding it in, and then he starts insulting my team, and wow. That's when I became a lioness, right? Because I knew they worked so hard for it, and I was becoming so angry and so frustrated that a tear appeared in my eye. Now he smiled at me and he offered me a box of tissue. And Steve, I can tell you for a moment, I had this warm, fuzzy feeling, remember, in my first boss, Jim. But then I lifted my eyes and I noticed something weird in his smile, almost evil. And he turned around the tissue box that he offered me. And on the other side of the tissue box, he prepared a handmade sticker in advance, which basically read Dalia's tissue box.
Oh.
He was ready and prepared, and he was doing everything that he could to make me cry, and he thought it was a funny joke, right? And I told this story in one forum. Every time I tell the story and I see people go, right?
Yeah, it's so cruel.
It was kind of almost insanely cruel, right? Yeah. And I told him, I mean, this is an HR assault. And that's kind of scared him for a moment. And then he became all serious and he's like, oh, stop being so emotional. It's just boy banter. I know you have a sense of humor. And so that kind of became, a week later, he saw me arguing with someone and he was like, I was talking with some of my peers and like, oh, you think Dalia is such a tough platoon commander? She has a tissue box with her name on in my office. So it kind of became this energy between us in a way. I'm a feisty little one, right? I wasn't raised to give up, and I was raised to always speak my mind. And he was just determined. He told me once. I told him, "Why do you stab and turn? Isn't it enough?" I was trying to deal with it with humor, and he said, "Yeah, I stab you. Oh, I knock you down, but you keep coming up." And I told him, "Well, is that a game?" And he's like, I'm kind of, aren't you enjoying it? So it became like a crazy, later on I researched it, right? It's called the dance, the dance of death, where, what he wanted is appreciation. What I wanted is appreciation. He was determined not to give me any appreciation. He actually told me, I'm not going to tell you what you're good at because it's a waste of time.
Oh my God.
So it was a very challenging experience. Now, I would say, people ask me, oh, why did you stay? Or, I really loved what I was doing. I was the main breadwinner. My husband was open and he's high tech. And I kept on saying to myself, I'm not going to quit. I'm not a quitter. I was a competitive gymnast. So all this energy kind of, and then I also, I don't tell this very often, but the person that placed me in the role once, she told me, she was asking me how it's going, and I told her a few things. I was very loyal, so everything was just hinted. And she said, yeah, I know. He's a really challenging boss, but only you can change him.
Wow.
So I had this sense of mission.
Right.
But I realized you can't change someone that doesn't want to change. And when it comes to really toxic environments like those, there's only one strategy, which is zero tolerance. And, when I left, I kind of said to myself, what a waste of human potential. I mean, this is insane. Same person in one company, I was, over-delivering every year. And in the other company, same person, I was, busy just making sure, I don't get stabbed in the back. And all the energy went on defending myself. They thought I delivered, but I know I gave them 10% of my ability. So that kind of drove me to start studying it. I went back to psychology. I did my master's in organizational psychology. And then, I was driven to bring it back into the corporate world because I realized that not all companies operate from a people-first strategy. And what I grew up with P&G was quite rare in the workplace. And actually, the second year, maybe that was extreme, but sadly, it's way too prevalent in the business world today.
Yeah, it's more common than I'd like to believe. I've experienced it. I've seen it. So I think the way you turned that terrible experience into the gift of your book is absolutely amazing. Because the message, the Dare to Lead Like a Girl, is a message of how kindness and empathy and all the qualities that people think as feminine qualities are really the best leadership qualities. And I think we've had a misperception of that over the years.
Yeah, the soft skills are actually our power skills. And today more than ever, I mean, when I started researching, first of all, I saw how prevalent it is. Okay, I think, we see 85% of employees are unhappy in the workplace today. 1 in 4 experience acute anxiety. Bullying at the workplace is 20% experience it directly and another 20% see it indirectly, and both have very high psychological kind of cost, if you like. And I can tell you, I always say I was head of women's network in P&G. I fired a few people for misconduct. And yet when it happened to me, I was like a frog in boiling water thinking, oh, I can coach myself out of it. And I think that's another thing that, also speaking almost like domestic violence. And, the analogy is crazy, but it's there. And women, very successful, very smart, keep on saying, oh, I'm the one that can help, that person change. And the reality is you can't coach yourself out of a toxic environment. You really, the zero tolerance needs to come from day one and from everyone involved, meaning, sorry, sir, but you're not going to speak to me like that. Or sorry, miss, by the way, bullying is as prevalent with female bosses and male bosses. So I really kind of, it's really a matter of us putting the boundaries, but also the company putting in place, asshole prevention.
Yeah. I think we need asshole prevention across the board.
Across the board, because it's just became insane where, at some stage when you come to power roles, and it's not a nice to have. It's not a matter of, it will help our people feel more engaged. It's not, it's hardcore business results. I mean, the cost of hiring a bully, and we're seeing it now with the Great Resignation. The father and son Saul did research for Sloan Business Review, and they basically found back in Jan 2020, they were researching the reason for the Great Resignation, right? Because people were thinking, it had to do with burnout or pay or, people kind of taking on too much. And basically they found the number one driver was toxic environments.
Yeah, it is costing us. I think it costs across the board, and the human cost is huge. And you're right, it isn't just the person that it's directly happening to, though that impact is extraordinary in a terrible way. It's also all the people that witness it.
Yeah.
And, it causes people to live in fear, and fear is the least motivating emotion.
Yeah. It works short term.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, from a business results, very short term.
Very short term.
Okay, but then at the end of the day, it's like you don't, and in some businesses, because most businesses today require the creativity and the agility that comes when your brain is in a positive, nourished state. We have data on that as well. Every measure of productivity increases when you're in a positive state. That's why when I met Professor Tal Ben Shahar and I started studying with him positive psychology, it was almost like everything that I intuitively believed about leadership was grounded in research. And I love that. It's proven that being positive is good for every business except being a lawyer. Okay, that's the only business where you need to have a negative, view of reality to prepare for all kind of situation. Every other profession, our brain is 30% more productive when it's in a positive state. Our employees kind of deliver. I saw it on myself, right? 200% versus 10%. So that's kind of really my rallying cry. It's kind of for all leaders, women to recognize that these innate, historically feminine, there is no such thing as feminine or masculine brain.
Right.
It's really more socialization has called some traits the soft skills or the feminine skills, empathy, intuition, teamwork. And some skills are the positive masculine skills like logic and direction. But the business world has sunk into, Rasi Sota and my friend Nili Mabat, they wrote a book called Shakti Leadership, and they kind of bring this model around the wounded masculine that in the business world today, we sank into power over people versus power with people. So dare to lead more like a girl is really a provocation to tilt that balance. And it means for women to stop thinking that they need to behave like men in order to succeed.
Thank God.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have, and for men, so many men, I can tell you, wrote to me when the TED first came out that, they were called that they lead like a woman, and, being really proud of leading from your heart, for the sake of business results. So someone said, oh, yes, but you need all that, but you also need business results. And I'm like, they're not contradicting. Of course, you need business results. That's the ground of what we're doing, right? If you're not performing, you shouldn't be, no matter how kind and nice you are, right? So business results is the core. The question is, how do you go about achieving those results? And that's kind of the essence.
I don't think people will follow. They will in the short term. They will if they're trapped or they think they are. They'll follow someone that's, abusive. And those cultures are really prevalent in America. That sort of, take no prisoners, win at all costs point of view is really ugly.
Well, if you think America is actually better off than many other cultures, but sadly, across the board.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. And when we think about the leaders of the future, the Gen Zs, the Zoomers, they are much less tolerant, right? Which is a great thing.
That is great.
So a leader that's not leading from his heart, right, will not have any followers. And that's basically mean he's a manager and not a leader. And there's a huge difference between the two.
That is so true. I mean, in my career, I've been criticized for caring too much about employees and, taking care of them. And I'm like, look, if you want people to perform, they have to feel safe. If you're constantly under threat, your performance just goes into the garbage. There's nothing, no one performs when they're afraid.
And I love Amy Edmondson's work. That became kind of the basis for my thesis and many things that, really to achieve psychological safety is about speaking out your mind and operating, not being afraid for your kind of career consequences. And it was found that the number one driver of high performing organizations is actually, do you have psychological safety?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Creating psychological safety is the number one kind of priority of leaders in today's world. So what does it mean to create psychological safety? It's not being nice. It's not sugarcoating, right? That's sometimes people come to me, especially when I worked in Asia, where it's very much conflict averse. And I always say conflict is an opportunity for connection when you go about it with curiosity. And that's really an important kind of element there. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's not about pitching over issues. It's about being honest, but being caring. And, I saw the criticism of, over honesty. It's really being, I call it caring candid. You can't be an asshole and call it, but I'm being candid. That's not what it's about.
People know if you're being honest with them and telling them the truth and hiding information and not sharing it and not telling someone straight up, but kindly, like, here's what you could work on. Here's what we need a little more of, also what's going on with you right now,
Yeah, people will rise up to your highest expectation or sink to your lowest. So it's how do you are demanding, okay, you do set a really high standard, but you come from a position, okay, this is where I think you can perform. I believe in you. What do you need in order to get there? Because you're not there currently, and this is what I'm seeing, and this is why. So it suddenly puts a person in a state of, I can get there, and I've been given amazing tough love feedback. Actually, my first boss, Jim, is a master in that. So the chapter on people development, actually, we co-authored.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I bought him back, 20 years kind of, because most of the, lessons that I learned were then kind of proven with research, but it's really around setting the bar high, but knowing how to give feedback, how to pinpoint, how to really understand if it's a can't, won't, or just doesn't do it. If it's a attitude issue, if it's a skill issue, if it's a expectation alignment issue, right? And you can fix everything except attitude. So if it's really attitude, and he doesn't want to do it, then he's in the wrong place. But all the other things are coachable.
They sure are. And I think, the giving someone the tools, but also letting them know that they're supported. So they feel like, hey, I can try and I can strive to be better is a lot different than, your job's on the line if you don't perform. That's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. So some of the things that I've seen you talk about that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, is the role of purpose and joy in the workplace. And, those I think are concepts that are foreign to a lot of leaders of why would I be talking about joy or purpose or those kind of things with my employees? I just want them to do their jobs. So can you speak a little to that?
I discovered purpose very early on. So I was lucky. I was working on the FemCare business, and I'll tell you two stories that when kind of it landed for me. I mean, the first one was when I was working on the Israel business. We had a big competitor about to launch. It was Kotex. It was a big deal for us, and the best attack is defense, right? So we went and we said, okay, we did a life mapping. Where are we weaker? What do we need to do to strengthen? And we found that we're losing share among 18-year-old girls. And in Israel, what happens with 18-year-old girls? They go to the army and suddenly they get, an army salary. So they kind of choose the cheaper path. So I said, okay, I wanted to get back to them and, sample them and show them the new product and the relevancy and, why it's worth investing in the better product, especially now. And then I wanted to convince the army to allow me to kind of sample every girl. So being an ex-platoon commander myself, I remembered, you go to have a shower and everything gets wet and one big mess. So we created these really cool wash bags with individual compartments. And we sold that, and we went to the army and they loved the idea. And we were about to go up with the campaign. So basically every girl, when she gets her uniform, she would get this wash bag. And I wanted to add a personal letter, right? And I challenged the agency. They didn't come up with the right thing. And I found myself one evening and I was just writing for my heart as an ex-platoon commander. So you're sitting there on the bus, you just said goodbye to, your parents, and you're worried and you don't know anyone, and you're looking through, the things that you got. And so we're here. And I talked about, both about the hygiene and the importance of hygiene in the army, but I also talked about, the pride that you should feel for serving as equal. And it was just a really kind of honest and open letter. And, I was in a state of flow, right? Meditation in action. I literally fell asleep on my desk. And in the morning, my boss came in and he's like, Dalia, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I was just writing an example for the agency. And he's like, can I read it? And he read and he started tearing. And he's like, okay, I want you to sign your real name, ex-platoon commander, and we're going to ship it as is. Don't change anything. And we did. And 2 days after the campaign launch, Steve, our help desk was inundated with calls from moms and girls that just wanted to say thank you for being there at such an important moment. And you see, I'm tearing up just thinking about it, because it was just, that's when I realized I'm not in the business of selling pads. I'm in the business of women empowerment. And that's kind of where I realized my purpose was about people empowerment. And I was just very lucky that when I had that, revelation, I could steer my career to focus on areas where I could bring my purpose to life. Now, what is purpose? And I do a lot with companies to help employees find their purpose. And my very simple methodology, it's like I call it the simplified ikigai, which is about identifying what you're good at, okay, what your passion areas are, and then how you can bring them together in what the world needs or what the company needs. And in my case, I was good at, people and creativity, and I was passionate about women empowerment. So I could use that to kind of help my brand, and it did deliver the business results. So when I understood that, I kind of, whether I was as a marketing director working with my team, whether it was training and coaching, and those 17 years became really years of flow. Every moment I was on kind of purpose. And yet in the other company, my strengths were not only not appreciated, they were dismissed, right? I was too good with people. I was too creative. I wasn't process driven enough, right? Or so, and you literally feel, I felt like I had to leave my heart and my art at the doorway, right? So that kind of really propelled me. I mean, the notion of purpose, and I started researching. And we know that when we look at what drives happiness, and we look, there's a lot of different researches on that, but, Dan Botner did research among, communities that live longer than others. And they found that, having a purpose, raison d'être, ikigai, whatever the, idea is, but when you have a larger reason outside of yourself, you're happier, you're healthier, you have stronger relationship, because everyone wants to work with someone that's kind of has an inner burning. And the interesting thing with purpose, it doesn't have to be that kind of one big thing. I sometimes come to CEOs and I do leadership development programs now. I basically evolved my university program and created a corporate program, and with the Microsofts and the big tech companies. And I have sometimes CEOs come to me and said, oh, Dalia, but if I help them find their purpose, they will all leave and go live in the Himalayas, right? And I said, if any of employees have that in their purpose, well, let them go, but I'll tell you 99% don't. And it's about helping them find how they can bring themselves, because most companies, and every time I do a workshop and people come to me and they say, oh, but how can I do it within what I'm doing now? And I'm like, just have a conversation with your manager. You will be surprised. And I have so many case studies. I have one that I talk about was the senior lawyer who was working in, I can tell the company, it was Danone, okay? And she, through work with me on finding her purpose, realized that her passion was green energy. And she came to me and she said, Dalia, I need to leave. I want to work for an NGO. I want to do kind of green energy. And I'm like, wait, before you leave, I mean, Danone is an amazing company. It's a huge company. Did you have a discussion with your line manager about, what you love doing? And she's like, no, I mean, it's useless. I mean, what does being a lawyer have to do with? And I said, I will have a discussion. And she called me 2 hours after. She's like, you wouldn't believe it. I spoke with my manager and she told me they just decided on a global level that they want to do a big green energy project and they were looking for a team leader. And she became the team leader. And,
Wow.
it's just amazing. The universe aligns with a made up mind. So the first thing that I say is I work, and every time I do a leadership development program, I don't allow the CEO to take the program without a find your why kind of workshop, because it helps people, realize the methodology that I use, that I develop based on different kind of things, Simon Sinek and a lot of other things I've been through. But I go through storytelling and drawing of your life map and showing you that there's a red thread. All your highs and lows lead you. And when you're just able to see, and I kind of, when I do it, and I did it on myself, right? At the end of the day, my biggest pain, evolved into being my purpose, right? I don't want unhappy, corporate slaves. No one feeling like a corporate slave. And so I kind of made it my purpose to work with organizations to bring back purpose and joy. So purpose is kind of, the first element. But when we talk about joy or the science of happiness, studying with Tal, I developed what I call my 5P.
Yeah, I've read and listened to you talk about your 5P model.
I don't like saying that I invented it, because, different people call it in different names, but psychologists, philosophers all agree that it takes mind, body, and soul to be happy.
Yeah.
Helen Keller says the only definition of happiness is wholeness. So the model, and sometimes I come and I talk about well-being in a company, and they're like, oh, Dalia, yes, we're doing well-being. We teach yoga. And I'm a yoga teacher, okay? I'm a huge believer in yoga because it's one of the dimensions, and it's only one of the dimensions. And you really need to be building all dimensions to be happy. So those dimensions, I call them, number one is purpose. We talked about it. That's the core of everything we do. The second is perspective, which is all the mental health. It's basically the growth mindset that you have, how you deal with setbacks, understanding this notion of post-traumatic growth, okay? Everyone heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, but actually post-traumatic growth is 3 times more likely to happen. And that's really when you not only bounce back, so everyone's talking resilience. Resilience is bouncing back to where you were before. Post-traumatic growth is actually when you grow from your hardships. When you sit and you analyze and you say, okay, what is my lesson? Okay, what do I want to do with that? So, I do with companies something that I call the shit show, or in a nicer language, my fabulous failures, where I bring in the 3 most senior leaders and they talk about their failures, because we talked about psychological safety, right? And how important it is for organization. Well, the number one driver of psychological safety is leaders admitting their mistakes.
Yeah, vulnerability.
Their vulnerability and, being willing to fail forward, right? And to encourage that mindset of, yeah, you'll do a lot of things, not all of them would be successful, and that's okay. Key is what you learn from it. So that's kind of the second module. The third is the yoga, okay, which is the physical wellness, which is the importance of taking care of what we eat, our sleep, really realizing that today it's not about managing time. It's really about managing energy. And how are you being smart about managing your energy? And then the fourth P is people, which we just take for granted, but we know, from research that the number one driver of happiness is people. So Harvard did this 75-year-long research to understand the secret of happiness. Martin Seligman, and Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi did this research, and they found that it's really the quality of your relationship. And the same works for the workplace. So Gallup replicated, and they found the number one driver of happiness is, do you have a best friend at work? And number two is, do you have friends at work? And when it came out, CEOs were like, what is this stupid question? Right? And every
Right.
time they took the question out of the Q12, they call it, right?
Yeah,
they
right.
found, that was the key driver. So as a leader, how do you invest in getting to know your people as human beings? How do you invest in facilitating those relationships? I mean, I just wrote about it with Jim. We would go rollerblading, over lunchtime, and there's things that you could do. And even when you work remotely, to get to know each other, to ask, okay, how are you feeling today? What is going on in your household with your children coming in? Say hi, how old are they? Get to, get interested in the people that you work with and really care. My first boss actually realized that what's really troubling me is that my husband didn't find a job. So he created, a job for him for 6 months. He was head of the fitness center just until he got settled in and, finished his studies and, opened his own company. But these things are really critical. So that's the people. And the fifth one is positivity. And it's kind of the joy. And this is all about, positivity is not about being happy all the time. That's the big mistake. It's about being emotionally brave. It's about recognizing all emotions, are valid. It's a sign of being human. I like Tal Ben Shahar always says, who doesn't have negative emotions? Only psychopaths or dead people. So if you're sad,
Exactly.
that's great news. And it's true. So how do you as a leader make room for these emotions, that it's okay not to feel okay? And if you're grieving what's going on and giving you space for it. We always say, and this is a difference between men and women. It's actually proven with PET scans, and I'm going to share this with you. I think you would appreciate that women and men both have, same level of empathy, but women sit with it slightly lower than men. And men very quickly, another area of their brain lights up, which is involved with problem solving. So, and when I say it, I always say to men, stop trying to fix her, just listen to her.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why men come up with a solution 3 words into listening to someone.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
so
maddening.
Just be quiet. Empathy is really seeing the world from the other person's perspective.
Yeah.
So just, silent and listen have the same letters. Did you realize that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right.
Silence and listen.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh.
So shut up.
Yeah, shut up and just listen. Yeah, I think your style and getting to talk to you today, you are, without question, one of the most empathic people I think I've ever talked to.
You saw how many times I teared up?
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and I think you have a huge heart, and I think leading with your heart is so important. So the story you told about the letter to, the people who are serving and the women and connecting with them on such a personal level, that's the cornerstone of not only great marketing, but being a great person. It was vulnerable and it was real.
And I can tell you something, because the podcast is about brand stories.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that disturbed me a little bit in my last role as CMO, that it was all about the science. There is, of course, a science to marketing.
Yeah, of course there is.
But there's a whole art there. And I think, the brand, same as I do with people, what's your heritage? What's the story?
Yeah.
What's your life benefit? How is your brand changing lives? And, that's really something that P&G kind of, almost every brand, we were encouraged to think about how we change in life and how can you bring, and that makes that, when you speak from the heart, you reach hearts. And that's how people make brand decisions as well. Do you connect with the brand? And then you rationalize with 1,000 reasons to believe, right? But are you, do you know what your brand at its core is all about, and how are you changing, your consumers' lives? So.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing how few people realize how much a brand is like a person. The way you behave and the way you treat others is how people view you, and everyone buys everything emotionally. So we are emotional beings. So I think, understanding that when you're operating in the world of business is, so many people think everything is logical, and it's not. It's very emotional. And then we use logic to define and defend our decisions. And, I think your book, and I've seen your TED Talk, that's where I first discovered you and have been following along with your brilliant thinking and speaking for quite a while now. And I think your book, if anyone, the time I've gotten with you today has just been extraordinary. And I think if anyone wants to know more about the way you think and what you're offering all of us, just please buy this book, because so far what I've read, it's extraordinary. So thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you so much. And I think the one interesting, it touches, it's like I put a piece of my heart out there. And, a guy called me from Australia who just saw the TED Talk, and he's like, Dalia, I saw your TED Talk. I realize I'm an asshole. What can I do?
Yeah, right. I need to work on this.
Wow. So whether it's kind of for women, learning to kind of bring themselves, whether it's for men, whether it's for brand building. There's a lot of stories on kind of brand building that we didn't get to talk now. But really, when you speak from the heart, you get better results for, in terms of productivity, but also in terms of brands. So I'm super excited actually being here today in a brand story context.
Yeah, your story, your personal brand is just extraordinary. And your story is so powerful that I think anyone can learn from your story, but brands can learn from your story, because what you've been through, the way you talk about things, you could substitute the word brand in your book here and there, and it would still be a great lesson for how brands should behave and treat people. So, I've been a storyteller my whole life, and that's, as far as purpose goes, I was directing plays in my front yard when I was 9 years old, and I've always just loved people's stories. So I started this podcast just for exactly this conversation, just to be able to sit with you for a little while and hear your story, because it's just so genuine and so powerful. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Steve. That is so kind of you. And it's really, if this book kind of makes that little change that we so much need, in employees being just slightly more purpose-driven and happy. And what made me pivot, and I'll just finish with that, is when I was teaching at the university, and one of my students stood up and I did a find your why, and he was like all emotional. It's like, thank you, Prof. I now know what my purpose is, but I know I need to be a brand slave a corporate slave for a few more years, and then I'll do what I love. And I'm like, this notion of the younger generation, it doesn't need to be that way. So find what you are good at, find what you love doing, find how you can use your brand voice to better the world. There's so many more stories about India that you can read in some of the materials in the chapter there, but every brand has an opportunity to change life. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, that's a wonderful message. And we are going to talk about your book a great deal and put a link to it on your landing page and celebrate it, because I think people have so much to learn from it. And I think it's such a timely message today. I think we all need to be thinking about that, because it's about integrating our purpose into what we actually do, not waiting until we're climbing a mountain somewhere and then that's our purpose. We have to do it today as part of our everyday lives. So thank you for being such a motivator and such a wonderfully generous person. I'm going to show your book one more time because I want everyone to go get a copy. And I can't tell you how much I love this conversation. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today.
Thank you, and looking forward to see the ripples.
Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.